Hello there, and welcome along to episode 6 of the Garden the Bend podcast. I confess that this week's episode is a little on the lengthy side, so you may want to listen to this in a couple of instalments. I'm going to keep my introduction as a result as brief as possible, but last week I had the pleasure in driving across to North Dorset and a little town called Motcombe, which is just outside Shaftesbury. Shaftesbury was made famous in the late 90s and early noughties by the Hovis advert, which was filmed at Gold's Hill, just up the road. There I had the most wonderful and informal chat with the two sisters, Matilda and Natalie, who together are running Sorelle, which is Italian for sisters, I now know. A cafe and bistro and flower farm functioning as one business, all from their family farm, which also offers a really lovely glamping experience. I've had the pleasure of staying there several times myself, and it is the most wonderful spot, with huge safari tents, fire pits, wood burners, high quality linens and massive skies that go on forever and ever. It really is the most beautiful part of the world. Here is my conversation that I had with Natalie and Matilda last week. Right, I'm with Natalie and Matilda from Sorelle. So let's give you an opportunity to introduce yourself. For people that don't know what you do and where you are, tell us a little bit about the business and both sides of it.
Oh. you know what's thrown me is that we have a constant it's not a battle, is it? It's more like it's an in-joke. It's an in-joke of how we pronounce the name of our business.
Have I done it wrong?
It's kind of open to interpretation.
I have done it wrong, haven't I?
That's okay, because so it's an Italian word for sisters, which is Sorelle.
Yes.
So but everybody says it's completely differently, but we quite like that because we think everyone has their own sort of like interpretation of who we are and what we do. But basically, we're a cafe event space. We also have a flower farm attached, and it's based on our parents' small farm. So we are trying to diversify the farm basically.
Yep.
And serve lovely coffee and cakes and brunch to people in our local area. Okay,
so out of the two of you, there are obviously two people, two different skill sets. Who is doing what, and who is more towards the cafe and food side? Who is more towards the flower farm side?
We share a lot of our responsibilities, but I generally do a lot more of the flower farming. Tilly takes the lead on food, but we do both work in the cafe most days, and that is certainly where an awful lot of our energy gets spent at the moment. I feel like I've stolen Natalie away from the flower farm, and she's now having to cook with me every day in the kitchen.
And is that something you're really enjoying, or?
We love working together. I think whatever we do, we would love working together, whether we were out slogging it away in the mud or in the kitchen. I don't think either of us are born to be chefs. I don't think we'll do it forever, but we always have enjoyed working together, so whatever we're doing is fun.
And I have to ask, one of the interesting things, obviously, because I've done something very similar to what you are doing on both sides, not only sort of farming and flowers, but also had a cafe and catering company before. How is it delegating to other people? Because obviously the two of you know each other's skill sets, you know each other very well. I can see there's a lovely relationship here, but I really struggled to let my baby go, and I really struggled to allow anybody else to do anything for me when I had my catering business. Are you able to let go of the reins?
Natalie's much better at it than I am, and she often tells me off. She'll be like, Tilly, there's people here that we are paying who can do this. You know, why are you stood washing up, for example? And
washing up is your worst. You are awful at letting go of the washing up, and I was very quick to let go of that one.
Is it because you think you do the washing up very well, or do you actually enjoy the washing up?
I don't think I enjoy it. I think it's an interesting one. I think it's more that I can't just stand still, and if there's a slight gap in food service, for example, I just find a job to do, and often that is the easiest thing, is to just go and do some washing up.
And do you know what? That in an employee, not saying it, but in an employee that you then have working for you, is a skill set that I don't think you can ever really undervalue. I had several ladies of certain ages that used to work for me, and they were always, what's next? And okay, we've got through this rush, I'm going to start preparing for the afternoon or actually I can start condensing that down for the end of the day, put that into a clean pot, get the washing up done, or I can do my stickers. And I had couple of ladies that were just absolutely spot on for the what's next, rather than, oh God, weren't we busy? And they sort of stand around, and then it's like, no, come on, because before we know it, there's going to queue of people, and we've got to keep moving again.
Yeah, it's having that initiative, isn't it? That's, we find it's like some people have it or they don't really.
Yeah.
It's hard to teach it.
Really hard to teach.
But yeah, I'm quite happy to stand around.
No, Natalie does all our social media, so often she's having to find content and try and get people through the door, basically.
Well, content I can give you. I quite often say to people that coming up with the idea of content is not a problem for me. It kind of, I don't know, I've found a format of media that allows me to just go and it sort of just comes out of me in sort of projectile forms. It's actually, now there's so many different aspects to it. There's so many different aspects to it that I actually now have to make sure that I'm spreading it out. Otherwise, it's far too much for people to see. They just get blind of the stuff I create.
But you're so good at putting your face on social media, whereas we're terrible. We shy away from actually.
It's normally because we're covered in bacon grease in a kitchen, and it's not the most aesthetically appealing situation.
I think you might be surprised. There is a market and an audience for everybody and everything.
I don't think I want that market for the people that are interested in bacon.
Whether you want it or not. I think if someone's looking, that's always a good thing.
Yeah, sure.
But no, I don't know. I do really struggle with my self-appearance and self-confidence. I don't know, you might not have noticed, but I've shed 40 pounds in the last 3 or 4 months. I got to the point where I kept telling myself I was happy with the way I looked, and I look at myself on camera, and I'm normally busy getting on with something. I'm not normally looking specifically at myself. I'm looking at the technical side and the information that I'm giving. But it gets to the point where you think actually it's holding me back, and I want to feel different about myself. I want to feel confident, and I'm fed up with it holding me back. And I just said to your mum and dad that obviously when we went to Mexico, there was a huge amount of processing that needed to be done. Seeing 2 siblings that work together and really enjoy each other's company is completely refreshing for me. I don't come from that. And obviously you're aware of the situation with my siblings and the situation that's happened there. And that takes an awful lot of processing to get rid of, and that you carry that with you, and it becomes heavy. And it might not actually necessarily be physical weight, but I was aware that I was carrying, for instance, like this water bottle around. Yeah. And you get used to carrying this weight, and it's not until you say, actually, no, I'm going to put that down. I'm not going to do that anymore. And I feel and people are noticing all of a sudden that I look different. My manner is different, and I am lighter and physically just happier. Yeah. And I felt blocked as well. I mean, felt fit. This podcast was supposed to have launched it in August, and it didn't come out till about 4 weeks ago, because I physically felt I could not do anything else without letting that go, whatever it was. I mean, there were several things that needed to be let go, but yeah, it's really interesting to see 2 siblings that actually get on, enjoy their and again, everybody always feels that they should compete with each other, and there should be this.
Oh, I hate competition. I'm so uncompetitive. I'm the person that, I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't like to lose, but I just choose not to compete in the first place. Instead, I'll just say, no, it's fine. You go and do that game, or go and win that thing. I'll just walk at the back.
See, I'm really competitive, but I'm not competitive with other people. I'm competitive with myself. I'm only ever reflecting upon myself, and I don't know whether that comes from having siblings, or whether it's just something that I naturally just wanted to do. But yeah, it's never actually with myself. It is only with me.
I feel like that's probably the biggest battle, isn't it? If you're constantly fighting something inside you, then you're never going to win, are you? No. Really, because so I'm really pleased that you've managed to kind of go through that journey and let some things go, because it's amazing how.
I remember it was Matthew McConaughey at one of his speeches was like, "Oh, the best person that you should aspire to is you in 10 years' time." It's like, that sounds exhausting. You should just be constantly chasing yourself forever.
I think you want to sort of slim the goal down to the best version of yourself today.
Yeah,
I think that's much better. I think that's much better.
Just each day at a time is nice. But then that's the problem with having a business, isn't it? People are like, so what's the 5-year plan? What's the how do you see yourself in 10 years? And we find that quite hard, because the day-to-day running of things is quite all-consuming. That I think for us, we both need to get better at taking a step back and going, right, okay, so where are we headed? Yeah. What's the next step, especially, with the flower farm and everything, and setting targets, but achievable targets, and targets that they're not make or break, but it's understanding, this is what we want.
Like, this is why we set this up in the first place.
Yes,
this is why we chose to do this, is to get to this point.
Yeah.
And brilliant, we've got there, let's give ourselves a pat on the back. Now where do we want to go?
Yeah.
Rather than, I think there's always a danger that another year goes by and you think, oh my God, we're still in the same place we were a year ago. We're having a nice time, but where are we headed? Like, what are we wanting to get out of this in the long run?
Well, sometimes the pausing is the nice bit as well. And we're finding that very much with the process we're going through at home, that actually people can't believe that we would let the house go that we've got and we would do something different after spending 6, nearly 7 years getting it to the point where it is, and not really being, I mean, I can't believe it's mine, but it will now serve a purpose. And actually the nice piece is now for us to just maintain it and do things. And we're in the belief that actually we might not be able to move. I'm getting frustrated that I want to move on, I want to go and do something else. But actually right now I'm in the right place and I have the stage set up for me to create and do what I want to do. And I'm able to pull back away from normal physical work a little bit and actually enjoy the space a little bit and do the other bits on the creation. So.
And you've created such a beautiful home and you've done so much work, especially with your garden and your patio and everything that you've worked so hard on.
It is really quite special.
How lovely to spend some time really being there and enjoying it before maybe making that move or going away. I think that's really lovely.
So how do you go about balancing these two very busy, different businesses? Obviously, you've got I understand that catering can be really, and cafe work can be really, really demanding. You've got to be present when you're present, when you've got customers. But how are you juggling between the two? Because obviously there are certain times a year where you are very labour intensive and you got to get stuff in the ground and you.
It's hard. It's not easy at all, and I still don't think we've got the balance right. Certainly, the plan always was originally that my majority of my work would be out in the flower field, and then I'd be able to be in the cafe when needed.
Yeah.
It's kind of the other way around now, where I'm in the cafe and then in the flower farm when needed, and we are absolutely blessed by our mother, who has spent the last kind of 2 months out there weeding, hoeing, pulling up old plants, getting the beds ready for winter, which I just would not have had time to do. I'd have got to now and gone, right, now I can start doing that, and everything would have been overgrown. It would have been a mammoth task. So having additional help is essential to us at the moment.
Yeah.
We'd like to get to a point where that's not so essential, and actually that's my passion, that's what I want to be doing, and that's where I want to put more of my time. But certainly at this stage in our growing business, my focus needs to be elsewhere pretty much always during those real important moments when you're meant to be out gardening. It's also when we're really busy in the cafe, because it's just those seasons just go hand in hand, that people want to be out and about when chances are you need to be planting tulips or harvesting or all sorts.
They're all either getting themselves into comfy, cozy mode and think, I'll go out and go and sort of snuggle up with a hot chocolate, or the spring arrives. It's, actually, no, I'm going to go out and I'm going to enjoy the Easter or Mother's Day or whatever it might be. And but you guys always seem to be incredibly busy, especially certainly here in the cafe. Your evening events are obviously really popular. We've missed out on attending any of those this year, which all of a sudden, in a blink of an eye, they're all over. And
well, we keep saying the months are passing by, and it's just amazing. We're now thinking about, obviously we're thinking about Christmas, because it's just going to come around so fast.
Yeah.
And it's summer was really good. We had lots of events. We had a monthly supper clubs, which we did last year and we repeated, and but we had guest chefs this year, which was really exciting. So we had, again,
that took the pressure off of you guys. I'm assuming that you could actually stand back and entertain and welcome your guests and be part of the. And rather than just the stress of cooking.
Well, that's the thing, because I think the balance at the moment, the way we set up the business was the flower farm came first, and then in our minds we thought, right, how do we get people to come and enjoy the flower farm and maybe buy some flowers when we are in a very rural location and you don't really get people through the door. So we thought, right, let's sell some coffee, because that's quite a nice, flowers and coffee always works quite well together. I think in our heads we'd imagine quite a small coffee box almost. But then we ended up with quite a big stretch tent, and almost through that we've then created a bit of a lovely monster, but still a bit of a monster that we have a lot of space that we can fill with customers and then need to feed them, and it's become very busy. So I think the thing we're finding at the moment is that we aren't very customer facing, which we used to love about our business. When we first opened, that our customers would see us all the time if they popped in, and we'd have a really nice relationship. So when we did have guest chefs doing supper clubs and it allowed us to be out and about a bit more, it was really nice, because I think we have lost a little bit of that kind of sense of connecting with our customers, because unfortunately we're always cooking for them, because it's a good thing, because it means that we're busy.
Yeah.
But we just need to kind of readdress it, I think.
And it's having the guest chefs taken a little bit of the creative pressure off as well, because again, I know from the sandwich shop I had 20 years ago that coming up with new and innovative ideas all the time. Okay, what ingredients have I got? What can I put in front of people that's new? What can I really spark their imagination with? It gets tiring, and it's only, so that's helped.
Definitely. And I'm sometimes quite envious of, because our sole job isn't chefing, sometimes I think if I was just cooking, it would be easier, because I'd think, right, I'll get excited about what soup I'm going to do this week, or what other specials I can do. But at the moment, because as soon as we finish cooking, we're then off trying to do admin or planning events or whatever, you just don't really have the headspace. And it's a shame that you lose a bit of that creativity, because cooking is, as with flowers, is such a creative sort of industry.
And it's also been lovely, though, having the guest chefs, because they then inspire us, and vice versa. Having those people come in and they cook these amazing dishes that you think, oh my God, I'd never have thought to have, I don't know, put rice with pomegranates or whatever. And it helps kind of create that creativity, I suppose, and continue to build on that. I think it's very easy when you start a business to be excited at the beginning, and then you get into the day-to-day, and it's hard to take that step back and get excited about it again. And I think having the guest chefs come in has really helped us with that when it comes to food. And I think it's the same as when we've gone to conferences, or I've gone and met other growers and I go and see other people's gardens. It's the same for the flowers. You get excited about different plants or different ways of growing things, or I don't know, different ways of doing things.
Yeah.
We went
working smarter.
Yeah, exactly. and getting excited. I think being excited about your business is the best thing you can possibly do, because it makes you want to go to work every day.
Yeah. Which is the situation that I've kind of been in for 3 or 4 years. My day-to-day work no longer excites me. And it gets to the point where you think, actually, we spend so long in our working lives, and I know this sounds like a real cliche, we can't all be happy all of the time, but actually I spend so long at work, so physically hard, that actually if it's not igniting my imagination anymore, if it's not making me happy, actually, do I want to do it? Do I want to find something else to do? Actually, yes, I kind of do. So,
but how brave and brilliant to know that.
It's terrifying.
It's so scary, but it's fantastic. How many people go through life not enjoying their jobs, but they think that that's obligatory?
Well, I think it's a bit more of a generational thing as well, isn't it? I think if you probably wind the clock back 50, 60, 70 years and said, for instance, to my late grandfather, okay, well, you can do anything you want. Well, no, I only know farming. I only know cows. He did cows and dairy farming for 50 years, didn't do anything else. And again, whether you asked him late in life whether actually did you have a passion for, I don't know, knitting, I don't know, just think pulling anything out of the air, you could have done anything you wanted, whether he would have changed or whether that's a mindset we've now grown up with, because we're in a point where we can almost sort of flit about.
We have those opportunities, I guess, and can kind of entertain that idea of changing careers or doing something completely different.
I also think that the kind of concept of retirement has changed, though, right? The idea that you work to a certain date and then you can relax. I don't think many people have that in mind these days.
No, I think that I've got a feeling that generation maybe again coming to an end. And so I mean, obviously you guys are substantially younger than me, and I'm already coming round to the fact that actually, wait a minute, what am I doing all of this for? Because again, obviously I don't have children, so who am I leaving this to? And I know that sounds a really morbid thing to do, but you have this idea you have to create some sort of legacy, either financially or for me it's a planting of a garden and a space. But then again, who am I doing that for? Is it for me or is it for somebody else? And if it's for somebody else, actually the question is, okay, you need to reflect on why you're doing it, because it should be for yourself.
Yeah, that's so true. It's so true. But I also think it's driven. Seems to be a huge rise. Whether this is just social media that makes it seem this way, I don't know. Seems to be a rise of people running their own businesses, whether it is just on the side of a regular job or through, because of social media, you can be on things like Etsy and selling online and be able to do your hobbies as well.
Well, you can reach markets that you never imagined were possible within a click of a button and a post put out there. So,
but I think running your own business gives you a slight sense of longevity and this idea that actually I need to build something that will support me, not just now, but potentially past my retirement age, because I might have to keep working, or I need to build something that then I can allows me to be able to take a step back from physically working and doing more of what we want to do. It's interesting.
So with regards to the flower farm, what have been your biggest learning curves about starting that? Because you've diversified and you now do a lot more than you used to, for instance, when you started. Mm-hmm. So what have been the huge learning curves that you've...
My learning curve with flower farming has been extreme. I've gone from growing nothing and killing most things to now we've got probably just under, maybe about half an acre of full beds. And I've had to learn a lot. Mainly, I'd say the biggest learning curve in terms of physical labour has been converting pasture land into growing space is really hard.
Yeah, and what technique have you used for that?
So done no dig, which has actually been quite good for us because we're on really thick clay.
Yes.
The idea of digging anything is exhausting. We just can't. So we've actually realised that we have to take a much longer approach to creating beds.
Yes.
So we now do our cardboard, thick compost, quite a lot of horse manure, which we're very lucky to have from our farm anyway. It's a nice free resource for us. And then we cover the beds in silage plastic, which we do reuse, we don't just bin it. And we leave them, some of the beds we've left for a whole year because the ground is just so thick and so dense that in order to get any kind of lightness or air into the ground or any kind of organic matter going into that thick clay, it's taking a really long time. And even then, we've had some beds that we've then pulled everything back and it's just solid clay again because
cover it back up again,
straight down in, and it's hard work. But it's also taken that long to kill off some of the things. Like we've got some wonderful plants growing in our field, like creeping buttercup, couch grass, dock leaves, all things that are really quite hard to get rid of.
I've got all of that in the garden at home, and bindweed, which I say to people that I could literally make rope that you could tie boats up with.
Touch wood. I mean, I don't want to tempt fate. I've got it in my garden, haven't got it in the flower field yet. I'm sure it'll find its way.
The funny thing with the bindweed is it literally appears from nowhere. I go round in May and deal with it when everything is really small, and then you go through that window where you think you've got away with it because everything comes up, the borders become full, and then you get to the end of June and it comes out the top. And then you can't do anything about it. You can't get into the borders, there's so much in there, the roses are full of thorns, and you just think, okay, well, now I just need to sort of graze it off the top. But I know I'm not dealing with it because it's still everywhere. It's difficult.
I've had some grow up through my windowsill. It's obviously come in my house, gone through the bricks at the bottom and up. And it's now in my living room. So I know the pain of bindweed.
But it's interesting you saying about the no-dig thing because, again, I try and install this into people an awful lot when I'm talking to them about... And actually, it's been something I've been doing this week on my media channels about soil improving, obviously, as we approach bare root rose season. And actually, don't be afraid to, if something in the garden is no longer bringing you joy and happiness, you can remove that and replace it with something else that might really like you, because there is a moving thing that you can get to shuffle these things about. And saying to people, actually, you can do this, but you need to make your soil amendments. And actually, this is my soil. And I put a little video up actually just this week of me holding a worm. It's just these meaningless things that seem to get loads of traction. It's, spend hours filming a video that nobody watches, and then me with a worm gets like 6,000 views. Well, why did you watch that? But yeah, it can be done really easily, and everybody's in a rush. They want to create a garden really quickly, but it doesn't come quickly. You've got to load the soil with stuff and just let the creatures do their thing.
Do you not feel bad about relocating plants? Because I just have this thing that I don't want to disturb them. And I know that they look so happy and established, and it seems a bit unfair. But
I don't know. In certain ways, yes, but I also try and install into everybody that it's your garden and it's your rules. And again, especially because obviously a lot of what I do is focused around focused pruning and mulching, that actually you're the one with the secateurs in your hand. There are thousands of tutorials you could watch online. Not everything's going to matter, is going to resonate with you. A lot of people like to make things overly complicated. They like to layer it with sound and rolling banners, and they want to bombard you with the smallest amount of information, which a lot of the time overwhelms people. And actually, this is really basic. This is your garden. This is your rules. If it doesn't make you happy, it doesn't make you sing, do something else. So if that plant is no longer bringing you joy, dig it up, move it somewhere else, replace it with something that does. It's a
really interesting thing, and but what's really interesting I find is with flower farming, which is a very different thing to having a garden and trying to change. I feel quite lucky that I wasn't really into gardening before I started flower farming.
Yeah.
Whereas Mum, who helps me, loves her garden, and the constant battle we have is I'll go out and she's done a fantastic job clearing a bed, but she's left one plant. I'm like, why is that there? Oh, but it looks so healthy. Like, yeah.
But we're growing zinnias.
But we're growing something else here now.
and that's marigold.
So, but it's got buds on it. I know, but they're kind of useless to me.
So that's the interesting thing to hear, that actually the flower farm is a commercial space where you're...
Cutthroat.
Yes, yeah.
A very, very cutthroat industry. It's interesting though.
Which leads me really nicely onto, well, we stick with the flower farm for a minute. How are you working out what you're growing, for instance, for next year? Because again, I'm always selling to my followers that I'm already planning 2 or 3 seasons ahead. Yeah. I know what spring and summer will look like next year, and I'm assuming you're having to do that quite well in advance, because you're not only picking up on the weather conditions of things that have been successful and commercially successful this year, but also what are people going to be looking for next year, colour wise or form wise.
It's a really interesting thing that I struggle with from a commercial point of view. It's very easy for me to pick plants and flowers and things that I like.
Yeah.
And I think everyone probably finds that. And if it was for my garden, who cares what anyone else thinks? They're for me. But obviously I'm looking at trying to make sure that I've got plants that not only grow really well here, have a long season, ideally things that I can cut and come again, or that I can replace with something else, but also that people want to buy.
Yeah.
If people don't want to buy them, they're useless to me.
So what have they been buying this year? What have you found that's been successful this year?
Dahlias.
Yeah,
Dahlias,
so we're still very much on the dahlia trend.
Mad.
Yeah.
And they were also brilliant. I mean, I know that you love your dahlias.
Well, I have to confess that I feel really awkward now. I've had a terrible season for dahlias. I'm famed for them, but I've had the worst season ever.
Why do you think that is?
I could not keep up with the slugs and the snails. Normally I rely on my birds at home to deal with the pest and disease problems. They will eat all the little tiny slugs, and everything comes up in late May, and by end of June I've got a fantastic crop.
Yeah.
But it didn't happen.
I didn't have dahlias till July, late July, but they're still going now. They're just finishing, and actually Mum and I had a chat yesterday and said, I think it's time. It's time that we say rest in peace, dear dahlias. But this year I'm going to, for the first year, wish me luck, I'm going to keep them in the ground.
Yes.
Because every year I lose pretty much all of them by digging them up.
Yeah.
So
again, this is something I'm trying to install into people, that Mother Nature will deal with absolutely everything. And actually the heartbreak of going through the stages of digging, washing, sorting, storing, when you can't actually have any control over whether the rats eat them, whether they get too wet, whether it gets too cold, they turn to mush, or you have a late frost and can't get them in the ground. Actually just leave them be, cover them up, and if they survive, yay, and if they don't, well, I'll have to go and buy some more bad.
Yeah. And the other big change for us, and in terms of planning for next year, so I've sown all my hardy annuals, just about to do my sweet peas, which is a little bit later than I'd like to do them.
No, I'm going to do an autumn sowing this year.
Yeah.
Normally, I'm normally devout on that. I like to put my greenhouse to bed, but I'm going to try an autumn sowing this year, only because again my sweet peas were so late again this year, because May was just so cold that I just couldn't get them moving.
Well, certainly this year has really not scared me. Well, it really put me off trying to force things too early.
Yeah.
Because I lost so much to the rain, the slugs.
The year of the slugs, wasn't it?
It was the year of the slugs.
It's like going to a party. You're always better turning up half an hour late.
I agree.
Than turning up half an hour early and being the only person stood there thinking, oh, now I feel like a spare sausage. Yeah.
Well, exactly. So the only plants I had early last year were anemones, which I love. They're some of my absolute favourites. So this year, I said, I'm not buying tulips. I
remember you buying thousands of tulips.
Thousands of tulips, and they've been really good for me. I've been really lucky. Haven't had tulip fire. Haven't had any nasty diseases. People love the tulips that I've been growing, because I've been growing extra tall ones, scented tulips that you can't often get from florists.
No, and they don't last. If you buy them in the supermarket, for instance, they simply don't last. They're tiny. They're really.
They're not tulips.
They're pathetic.
When you see what tulips can be, the tulips you buy in a supermarket are not tulips. But and it does break my heart a little bit, because I love them and they're such a joy at the beginning of the season, but I'm not growing them this year because the cost of the bulbs has gone through the roof.
Yeah.
I can't really buy the varieties that I know I can sell for less than 50p a bulb. And if I'm going to lose some of them to mice, which you inevitably do, and I've got to go through the labour of planting them and then trying to sell them when people are used to paying £3 for a bunch of tulips, I can't compete with that. So instead, I'm buying loads of anemones and ranunculus, and I'm just filling the polytunnel, and that's what I'm going to do for the spring.
Well, kudos to you if you can get your anemones and your ranunculus to grow, because I've given up with ranunculus. I'm 30 years deep as a gardener, and there are few things that I will give up on, and I cannot be bothered anymore with ranunculus. Much as they are pretty, oh no, I can't.
You know what? I would never have them in a garden. I would never have them in my garden because they're just divas. But for growing en masse...
Too wet, too dry, too cold. Oh.
They always get mildew. They always get eaten by something. But they are a really lovely thing to have so early in the year. And especially in our tunnel, we get crop after crop after crop of the same plants. So in terms of the value for the corm versus the tulip bulb, it's just a no-brainer for us to try and get as many of those in the ground as possible. And touch wood, we've got a few voles in our polytunnel, but the mice haven't found it yet.
I think you want to touch all the wood, touch your head, So with regards back to the sort of catering side of things and the bistro and the cafe, how much of your menu is seasonally dependent? Where are you, for instance, sourcing your produce for? Is that locally or?
Yeah, well, as much as we can, we do it locally. So, for example, we have some amazing charcuterie that we get from a company called The Real Cure, which is just based outside of Shaftesbury, and we actually went and visited them, and it's just really nice being able to see exactly how something's produced and have it so local.
They let us stuff some sausages. Tilly was terrible at it.
I was terrible. It was actually
I can imagine it not being particularly easy. I think once you're quite well rehearsed with it, it's probably ezy, but I don't think
the way it shot out of that was pretty alarming, to be honest. It took me by surprise. So things like we would like to grow more veg, but we try and buy our veg as local as we can. Tomatoes we actually get from Isle of Wight tomatoes.
Yes.
Because they're amazing, and they've actually just been awarded B Corp, which is really cool. But we buy them through a local wholesaler.
Our original vision was to have a little market garden, grow all our own veg, supply our cafe. But again, when we talk about the lovely monster that we made, we can't grow enough at the moment.
No.
Certainly things like tomatoes. Even this year, I grew quite a few tomato plants. Mum grew a load of tomato plants. There's no way we could have grown.
But you need pounds and pounds and pounds of tomatoes to be making tomato soups or passatas or.
And then it's a full-time job harvesting the blooming things
and processing them.
But even things like so we wanted to use meat from the farm.
Yes.
So we have pigs, not very many, granted, but we've just had a load of sausages back from said pigs, and we think it's going to last us until Christmas, and that's it. And then so we actually don't. It's amazing how many sausages, for example, we get through. So things like meat, we want to be as careful as possible with where we source it from, so we have quite a nice relationship with the butcher.
But that's a good thing. I mean, also, one, it makes them incredibly special when you do have them, but also I don't think you really want to dilute the fact of how much pressure it takes off the food industry when you are taking. You're saying your sausages will only last till Christmas, but that's 12 weeks.
Yeah.
That is 25% of the year, which you have managed to cover with your own project. You know the heritage and the history behind the meat. So I think that's a really good thing. I mean, if everybody just took the pressure off for 25%, the difference of the food industry would be amazing.
The thing we find is a constant sort of headache for us, I suppose, is that we started this wanting to do things as sustainably and locally as possible. We had some hiccups on the way, obviously, where we weren't quite sort of set on our vision, I suppose, but trying to get the balance with then having a sort of business that makes money,
yes,
and that your customers care about, and working out what your customers do care about in terms of...
because people are so fickle.
So fickle. You say, why is this much money? And you say, because our sausages are grown, like we've reared the pigs, they're grown here. We've got the pigs from the farm.
And they can be very difficult to get them to germinate as well. They're very, very hard to get them to chit.
Yeah, very tricky. That no-dig approach.
The clay makes them even harder as well.
The tomatoes are expensive. Our charcuterie is expensive because they're all such brilliant products and delicious and such a high quality. But then I think when people are faced with that on their plate and then see the price of it, it's a really weird discord between...
I think people have been preconditioned that a certain amount of money gets them a certain amount of stuff, and having gone on the journey physically that I have over the last several months, I no longer put anything in my mouth that doesn't make me happy. Yeah. I know that sounds very entitled and very arrogant to say, but I mean, for instance, the other week we were actually at a cafe. I ordered something that was delicious the time before, which was terrible. I took 2 mouthfuls of it, put my knife and fork down and put it down, and that's it, that's done. I'm not going to shovel that into myself anymore. It doesn't bring me any pleasure, and I'm now eating far less, and we've also reduced massively our meat consumption to the point where actually I think we're probably realistically eating 25% of the meat we did before. And when you start going, okay, well, we used to, and I'll admit this in public, that we used to go to Nando's and I would hoover up an entire chicken. I mean, I can eat quarter of a chicken now, and a chicken now lasts us an entire week between 2 people when we used to eat one for a meal. And that's a terrible thing, but we've got used to these things being available. It doesn't necessarily make it good.
I think it's a mindset shift, isn't it, that we all need, and I hope that we are moving towards that as a culture, but it's tricky. And I think it, again, going back to what we said before about that, a certain generational attitude of, especially when it comes to pricing.
Yes.
And I think some people are very used to prices before, and it's just not realistic anymore.
No, things have changed greatly.
I think a huge shift certainly has been, for our generation, I think very much would see going out as a treat.
Yes.
I think there's an older generation who almost see it as a right, almost, that they should be able to go out for breakfast and be able to afford it every day. Mm-hmm. And how dare we charge them so much that they can only do it once a week. Whereas I think it's that mentality of, okay, but it's not that we're just making you scrambled eggs on toast. It's that we're paying 10 members of staff every month. It's that we've got electricity bills that
are now astronomical,
ill. And, you know, there's a huge amount of work that goes on that people just... I think everyone's obviously cafes have existed for however long, and they've always had staff and they've always had expenses, but I think the expenses now are so high and wages are not high enough, I think a lot of people would argue, but the cost of our staffing versus what we're allowed to charge for our food in terms of what people are willing to pay just doesn't add up. It doesn't equal each other. Unless we were able to expand massively and accommodate hundreds of people. Yeah.
And then it becomes something that you necessarily didn't want to start. It takes it away from its original brief.
And I think this goes for any business. We very much wanted to set out to make sure that we weren't pretentious. We've always wanted to be something that's accessible to anybody. You could come on a date night, or you could come here just with your kids for breakfast one morning and you'd be very welcome. You can bring your dog, you can bring your granny, whatever.
Yeah.
But it's very hard to maintain that and also charge the right amount of money.
Yeah.
And I think that does stand for a huge number of businesses. And I think that we have this association that pretension means expensive and rustic means cheap. And actually, I think it should be accessible both financially and physically, and that's something that's really hard to achieve.
Yeah, and do you find that also with the production of flowers? I know we touched on that a moment ago about tulips and a price point of what you can actually achieve. And are you finding that also with the flowers that you're growing?
Yeah, I mean, I think same as food, it's education, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's people understanding just because... Funnily enough, with food, I think a lot of people understand if it's British, it's going to be more expensive.
Yes.
Because we pay a fair wage, we have restrictions over the chemicals that we can use, we have restrictions over animal welfare, and that's all a good thing.
Yeah.
So therefore it's expensive. People don't think the same way about flowers, and I don't quite understand why.
Well, again, I think probably because they're used to seeing them piled up in the supermarket and cheering themselves up for maybe £3 or £4, and then they throw them away.
Yeah.
Well, actually, the flowers are already maybe a week old before you've even got them. They've gone without water for long periods of time. They've often been sometimes in cold storage. They never open properly. No. Actually, a locally sourced bunch of flowers not only lasts better, it's seasonal, the carbon footprint is much better.
They're flowers that you can't buy in the supermarket because they don't travel. They might last an awful lot longer in water, but they don't travel halfway across the world. They've probably been grown without all these horrible pesticides, herbicides, chemicals. that have been proved to cause horrible, horrible illnesses. I mean, there was a study in Holland that showed the chemicals found on florists' hands from dealing with imported flowers could cause all sorts of like infertility, considering that this is an industry that is predominantly women in forestry.
Female, yes, yeah.
The chemicals that people are coming into contact with through imported flowers is horrendous.
Yeah.
But people's mentality is, if it's just growing down the road from me, it should be cheaper. And I think they're so used to this idea of, oh, well, my mum grows those in her garden, I can go and get a bunch for free.
Yeah, but can you get 50 bunches for a
Exactly.
display? Yeah.
And I think that's always going to be quite, until people's mentality shifts in the same way that it has done to food, towards flowers, I think it's always going to be hard to explain to people it's actually more expensive to buy something that's local and ethically produced, where people are paid well, and that the products, even things like bulbs that haven't been treated in pesticides, really, really hard to find.
Yes.
Because they're all imported.
Yeah. Also, the land that we use for these things here in the UK, land is massively expensive. I mean, even if you just look at an acre of land that you can use for commercial purposes, it will cost you so much more here in the UK than it will, for instance, in Holland.
And it becomes a huge social problem as well, because actually, particularly flower farming has a kind of unfortunate association with retired women who want something to do and they like gardening, therefore they convert their nice big garden that they can afford into a flower farm, and they sell buckets of flowers at the end of the drive.
Yeah.
Which is true for a lot of people, and it's a wonderful thing to be able to do, but not many people are actually in a position to be able to grow a lot of flowers.
No.
Because it requires land. And either people have enough land that they can farm, in which case they're not growing flowers, or they've got really lovely big gardens or an acre for a pony, and then they can grow flowers.
Yeah.
So it has this slightly interesting social kind of leaning that I think will take a while to get out of our system before people just think that they're putting money in the pocket of someone who probably already has a lot of money.
Yeah, because those flowers at the end of the drive are cheap because the land is already paid for, and actually it's easier to or cheaper to farm 150 dahlias than it is to feed a pony for the winter.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we went to a conference last year about flower farming, and it's a very interesting time for British flower farming because there are an awful lot of people getting into it. The number of flower farmers is growing rapidly, which is brilliant because it is an industry that historically we used to grow all our own flowers in England, in Britain. Used to always, because you couldn't import them. Then we went through, the same as food, a huge rush of importing flowers, and now we're in a position where more people are getting into flower farming, and the discussion now is around, okay, how do we make this accessible? How do we make it the norm that you buy British flowers and that you buy flowers that are grown responsibly and ethically? And I worry a little that it could very easily go down the more monoculture route that farming went down, because it's quite an easy knee-jerk reaction of, oh, well, you're great at growing dahlias, so you grow all the dahlias.
Yes, yeah.
I'm really good with alstroemeria, so I'll grow loads of that. And Tilly, you grow all the gypsophila because people go nuts for it.
But that unfortunately means your business then becomes very unstable.
Incredible.
You're always reliant on one particular crop or one particular season.
If one crop fails, then...
Yeah. And then you get kind of cooperative farming, and it's exactly what we've seen happen in agricultural farming and arable farming, where you go, well, you're great at growing wheat, you just grow all the wheat, we'll grow the barley, and we'll maybe...
It's also good for the ecosystem, isn't it? These vast swathes of one particular thing in one particular place.
Exactly. Whereas at the moment, there's this lovely sweet spot where most British flower farms are very small, like ours, half an acre. They're growing a real mix of different things, which is brilliant for biodiversity, brilliant for wildlife. You've got early pollen, you've got late pollen for all your pollinating species, things like honeybees. Our polytunnel's often full of honeybees.
Well, you keep bees here on the farm, though, don't you? Is your father still keeping bees,
He does. But that is just a really beautiful business. And if you can make that work, what a wonderful addition to the world as well as to the industry.
Yeah.
But it's trying to make sure that that is accessible and can work as a business, and that doesn't get pushed into this world of kind of mass farming, which I think we've seen already through arable land has been really dangerous.
Yeah. So going back to the fact that your sisters are working together, this is not a loaded question. I don't want you to think this is at all a loaded question, because it's not. No, I don't think you will fall out. But is there a working quality in either one of you? I'd like to both to answer this one. what qualities and working skills have you worked out that each other has that may have been surprising or you really admire in each other?
I think it's actually been such a good lesson for us working together, because we've always been close as sisters, but I think we've never seen each other working, I suppose, in that sense.
It's something someone that normally goes off to do, and you don't see that.
Yeah, and you don't really see it. So I think with Natalie especially, I've seen this quality of I'll talk to you directly, are so organised, so...
For the listeners, they're staring deeply into each other's eyes.
It's a real bonding, significant moment.
This is like therapy.
It's cheaper than therapy.
Oh, this is great. It's so organised, but also you have this real strength of character, which I knew that you had, but I didn't know that you applied to your work ethic, which I think is a real... It's hard to describe, but you can just tell when Natalie has... you have a really clear vision of what you want to achieve, and I think you're really good at sticking to your guns, and you don't let other people influence... Not that you don't listen, that's not true, you do. You're very good at taking on board feedback, but I think you also know what your values are and you stick to your guns, and I think that's very admirable. I admire that in you, Natalie.
That's incredibly kind.
And she's good with numbers, which I'm terrible at, so that's nice.
Mark is just unbelievable with numbers. His capability of numbers, and it's mind-boggling. There are certain board games now that not only I refuse to play with him, but we love a game called Rummy Cub. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Don't play Rummy Cub with Mark. Everybody has refused to play it, and we've got very dear friends on the other side of Fordham Bridge. My parents won't play with him anymore. Mark can literally pick up maybe 10-15 pieces because he can't go, and then literally wipe a board and overlay it, and then literally rebuild the whole watch, and then literally go out in one go. It's very... Nobody else enjoys the game apart from him. You're all playing away quite happily.
Mark, when you listen to this, you can come and play.
He won't listen to this.
Yeah.
And how about the other way round?
You know what? I think it's interesting that you say that about me, because I think we both are incredibly similar and have very similar traits. But I really admire in you almost the opposite of what you admire in me, in that you are sensitive, and I think that's so important when you have your own business. I think...
Is this because I cried over a sausage sandwich once?
Yeah, but I would never
Was it a
cry.
particularly good sausage sandwich? Because
I've
been moved to tears before I buy a good sausage sandwich. Get the sauce and the butter ratio just right.
I think if Tilly had been eating the sausage sandwich, she'd have been much happier that day. It was a day of overwhelming orders.
Oh, okay.
And it hit the point where this sausage sandwich...
Did you forget the sausage sandwich?
And no, it was the quantity that were ordered, and it was just, the straw that broke the camel's back happened to actually be a sausage sandwich.
But I would never have cried over the sausage sandwich. I would probably have gone to the customer and said, "No, you're not having it." Because it's going to make me cry if I have to do this. So I'm going to draw the line. Whereas what you are able to do is go through that point and come out the other side.
Do you know what? I'm seeing two different characteristics here. One person that is very passionate about food and the emotions that food brings and the comfort that food brings, and then the very cutthroat life of growing things. And people often say to me online about how can you bear to shovel prune? For instance, this week we were talking about soil amendments a second ago, and you say, well, how can you move stuff about the garden? Well, actually, what came out of the garden was my number one rose in 2019 and 2020. It was no longer bringing me joy. It was slowly fading. I've shovel pruned it. But it no longer brings me happiness, so therefore I'm very cut and dry, I'm very black and white. Sorry, we're done, we're moving on to something else. And I think with growing, you have to go, you look at something and go, oh, you're dead. You chose not to live. I did everything I could. Right, what are we going to put in your space? What's next? Otherwise, we can't move forward.
I think I've got that thicker skin. I mean, not in the sense, things do affect me. I nearly broke in the spring with all the slugs. It really nearly I got to a point I was like, sod this. Why am I growing anything? This is a nightmare. But what I see in you, Tilly, which I don't think I have, is the sensitivity that certainly for a business that involves customer service.
Yep.
I think my black and white vision sometimes goes, well, they're being ridiculous, so just no. Whereas you have the ability to say, yes, they are being ridiculous, but they're a human being who wants food, and we can do this. and we can actually make their experience all the better for that, and they'll be very grateful. And you're able to see around the thing that makes me go, no.
But I think you need a bit of both. And I think that probably is why we do work well together, is that those times where I need to be tougher, I look to you. And then maybe the times when you need to be a bit more sensitive, you look to me. So I think it's a funny, like, complementary.
I don't want to do you a disservice though, because I think you're incredibly strong. I don't think it's a sign of weakness.
Oh, I don't think there's any weakness whatsoever in sensitivity. I think it's a trait that we should all show an awful lot more of.
Oh, but absolutely.
And the disturbing fact of the matter is, in normal communities, that most people will see that as they'll see a weakness and they'll pick at it, and and which is why again, I don't want to draw back onto the sibling bit again, but every relationship you see depicted, certainly on the media or film or TV, are always these siblings that we saw it the other day on something, and again, there was like 4 siblings together and somebody had to tear somebody down to make themselves feel better, and that necessarily isn't the way it has to or should be. It's no.
And I think there's this assumption, working as siblings together, we had no idea if we'd be able to work together.
No, it's a big old risk. Well, working with any family member. Yeah. As you know, I've worked with my father for the best part of 15 years. Yeah. A customer will always say, "Oh, how does it get on working with your dad? I mean, it must be awful." It's like, well, he's been my best mate. Yeah. I respect him, he respects me, he has a different skill set than I have, he respects the skill set I have, and we've bumbled along really quite nicely. And now that he has retired, it's terrible. I miss him greatly. The business is no longer what it was when we started it, and therefore I'm going to move on to something else. It's not that I'm throwing my toys out my bag and go, well, you're not here anymore, I'm going to go off and do something else. It's actually more to the point where, actually, no, this isn't the same, and I need to reflect on that. Actually, I can't turn this into what I want it to be anymore, so I'm going to go and do something else.
I think it's fascinating how different dynamics work. So Mum and I will work for hours and hours together in the flower field. Yep. Greenhouse, anything to do with plants, growing, outdoors, we're a dream team.
Does that mean your dad's really good in the kitchen?
No. What it means is, don't put Mum and I in a kitchen together.
Okay, yeah.
It's really interesting.
Really interesting. We can't work in that situation together at all. And she would completely back me up on this.
Okay, yeah.
If she had to walk into the kitchen when I was in there, she'd be like, I don't want to work with Natalie. Fine.
Can I work front of house today?
Yeah, but you and Mum work brilliantly together in the kitchen. It's interesting. And thank God you and I work really well together, both in the kitchen and front of house, and kind of doing most things so far. We haven't found our thing that we clash over yet.
Not yet. Yeah, it'll be there somewhere.
Yeah, customers do often make that comment of, oh, you're still talking to each other then. And I think that does sometimes take us
again, because everybody likes the failure, everybody likes the argument and the drama, and my life is not about that anymore. My life is now I'm celebrating the peace and the quiet and the harmony.
We should all strive for that, of let's just kind of take it easy and just try and get on. And
I heard someone on a podcast once say, we really undervalue contentedness.
Yes, yeah, very much so.
And I think that's stuck with me forever. I'm like, why do we think that that's a bad thing, to just be happy with our lot and comfortable and peaceful? Why do we always have to be fighting something or pushing for something all the time?
Again, I said this to you earlier, didn't I, before we hit record, that I'm quite happy with everything that I've achieved. If there is more for me out there, I'm quite happy to go ahead and achieve more. But Mark is driving for lots of things. He's very driven at the moment with his career and his next goal and changing the world and giving voices to people. And that's amazing work. I love that. But I quite often, when he tucks me into bed at night, and he says goodnight, and I say, I've loved you very much. I've been very happy with the dog and the house and our relationship together. If this is everything, I don't wake up, I'm content. Yeah. Thank you. And don't get me wrong, I don't wish for my time to end, but if someone calls my number and it's my time, I'm really happy with what I've done. Everything that I set out to do as a child, and I wanted, and I'm happy. So yeah, contentment, all good.
People spend their lives searching for that.
Yeah,
their whole life they will dedicate to the kind of potentially religious hunt to find that feeling. How amazing that you have it.
I'm very lucky, yes. Yeah.
It's amazing.
The big question nobody ever wants to ask, and I'm asking it in different ways to all the guests that are coming on. I'm going to ask it in 2 different ways because we've got 2 different sides of the business. Okay, so if you could only cook one dish for the rest of your existence, what dish are you going to cook?
Does she have to eat it?
Yeah.
Well, I would advise you eat it, yes.
But is it something... Oh, this is so tricky.
Why? Is it common? Okay, we'll open it up. Is there a dish you really enjoy cooking?
From the menu that we do, or just
in general, it doesn't have to be. I mean, obviously, if you wanted to plug the menu, that you're more than welcome to.
I love Italian food,
Yes.
so I really enjoy trying out new things. There's a really good, it's not actually from an Italian chef. It's from Mary Berry, our own
Queen
our
Mary
own
Berry.
girl.
Yeah.
She does a really good Tuscan chicken, which is just delicious, and I find that quite nice to cook because you can do it in advance. You can prep everything in your own time. It's not very stressful putting it together, but it's really delicious when you finally sit down to eat it. And I just think...
So it has that wow. It has that wow, but you're not labouring in the kitchen. You can enjoy your guests.
I like cooking simple but tasty things.
Yeah, I think which is very much the Italian concept.
When things are too overcomplicated, I just think life's too short for that. But I just... Good ingredients, simple ways to kind of put the flavours together. Don't overthink it, and then that's... So I would go... I'm going to regret this. As soon as I say it, I'll think of another dish. But at the moment, Tuscan chicken.
Well, for me, it's always a rib of beef.
Ooh,
always
nice.
A rib of beef. Yeah, it's a solid rib of beef with obviously all the bits and pieces that go with it. But I absolutely love the ceremony of crusting, seasoning, cooking, resting, carving, and then breaking the bones down at the end of it, because that means I get some lovely bones to turn into some broth and some soup. So it's always a really lovely,
like
whole
ritual.
Yeah,
nice.
very much so. And again, you're not going to like this question, but again, if you could only grow one flower, again, you don't have to sell it if you don't want to. Doesn't have to take the commercial viability out of it.
You know what? Before this year, I'd have said sweet peas. However,
because I do know a gardener that sent you a large quantity of sweet pea seeds, which I'm assuming you felt obligated to sow.
Oh, I sowed them all. And the slugs.
That's me, by the way.
It was a gift to the slugs.
Oh, so...
There were drawers full of them at home.
I have so many.
I'm going to have to go off on a tangent and tell you a story. Mark, for work, did a World Inclusion Day event for his company a week or so ago, and there was a very large miscommunication problem, and we ended up with 8,500 packets of bean seeds arrive at our house, along with 8,500 cards that go with the bean seeds, and nobody to process, package and post them to get world inclusion, because they were going to... the idea was really lovely. It's a really nice idea that each member of staff for his company, there's 8,500 members of staff, we're all going to get a packet of bean seeds and a card. I mean, it's a silly little thing, but... And they were going to do a grow along together. They were all going to sow on the same day, so they were all visible and they could all grow along together. They ended up at my house. They didn't get distributed. So... There was nobody else. There was just me and him and one member of staff which we pulled in from another site, and 8,500 packets of seeds. I mean, you've never seen seeds like it. I mean, there's just boxes everywhere. But again, warning the post office that I was coming down with then 400 envelopes stuffed with these packets. You know what post office counters are like. They're in these little locked booths. What are they going to physically do with all of these? Because they're occupying my tiny dining room at the moment. And when you unpack them, the packages get bigger and bigger. They don't get smaller. They just get bulkier. And they were really good. But yeah, I mean, it's just like, what are we going to do with it? So I'm used to having sort of drawers full of seeds.
Oh, well, mine's not quite as dramatic as that. But there was one year, it must have been 2 years ago now, I bought hundreds of sweet pea seeds.
Yep.
And I don't know where they are. They're in my house somewhere.
Did you put them in the freezer, like
I
advise people to?
No, well, that's exactly
or a
what
fridge.
I thought. And I rummaged through my freezer and I thought, yes, I found them, and then realised they were the replacements that I'd bought.
Okay, yeah.
So I have sweet peas, God knows where, in my house.
Well, good news is they can last for up to 12 to 15 years. So
amazing, isn't it?
Hopefully you haven't turned them into a pea curry or something, or a split pea soup.
Who knows? Who knows in my house? Could be anything. But no, so if I had to grow one plant, what plant brings me the most joy? You know what? It's a really bizarre one, and I only say this because it genuinely brings me so much joy at the moment. Is in my garden I have a passion flower, which I bought for 50p from the garden centre. Mm-hmm. So not quite growing from germination, but
it was a rescue.
It was a rescue. Yep. I didn't see it for a couple of years. I thought, oh, it's died. And now it's come through into my porch, and it's still flowering all through my porch, and it's created like this curtain all over my house of passion flowers, which I didn't even think would survive where we are in the wind. And
because it gets quite cold here as well. That wind's evil.
I just assumed it had died in the frost, but it's roaming around my garden like nobody's business.
So the passion flower.
And the passion flower, it brings me so much joy.
Wonderful.
I can't even cut it.
Something people often ask me about is what my horticultural inspirations are. And it's always difficult to actually choose a person for me with this, but I'm going to ask you the same question as well. For me, the style that I am emulating, the style that I'm really aiming for is Great Dixter. That not only the arts and crafts element of that particular era, but also the massively overplanting, the height of things mixed together, the colour of things mixed together, planting vast borders that look good all year rather than just at one signature period of time. So where are you drawing culinary or horticultural inspiration from?
Horticulture is interesting because, again, I haven't come from a gardening point of view. I've very much come at this from flower farming, and there are several British flower farmers who I really admire. Celeste Roberts in Norfolk has done incredible things, especially working with like diversification of farmland, but also like social diversity as well within flower farming, which I think is incredible. But even kind of closer to home, there's Georgie Newbury, who's just a stone's throw from us. She is the first kind of first person that I ever came into contact with vaguely around flower farming. I didn't know it was a job. I didn't know it was a thing until I came across her book. And then I did a couple of her online courses. Her business is Common Farm Flowers. And she is a real interesting character, but also fantastic at explaining how to create a business that is a lifestyle business and that works for you. That's not completely bogged down by the growing calendar. Like, obviously the growing calendar is incredibly important, but without it we can't grow anything, but not feeling completely obligated to do everything that everyone else is doing all the time. And trying to make sure that your business works for you. If you don't want to work in December, don't do Christmas wreaths. Don't do winter weddings. Or
don't sow your sweet peas in October, because then you've got to look after them.
Exactly.
Which is why I don't do them.
Precisely. So it's saying, well, if that's the work you don't want to do, how do you modify it? How do you focus your season? How do you make sure that you're making enough money in those periods?
Again, that comes back to what I tell people about what works for them in their garden, and pick and choose the bits that work for you.
So I think, if you love tulips, maybe just grow tulips. How many tulips do you have to grow to then fund you for the rest of your year? Probably a lot. But it was a really important lesson for me in understanding that actually you don't have to be a slave to the system just because that's the industry you want to work in. You can work in that industry and design it to fit your life and the life that you want to have. And maybe that means working part-time at it and doing something else on the side. But I think
we've all got the side hustles.
Well, exactly. The sausage sales.
the podcasts.
But yes,
the YouTube channels.
Yes, Celeste Roberts and Georgie Newbury for me for growing. Been fantastic.
And how about culinary-wise? Where would you draw your inspiration from?
Oh, I think all over. But that's what's so nice about food, isn't it? You just you see things all the time. But we're really lucky that in Shaftesbury we've got an amazing cookbook shop, and they're called The Kitchen Table. And we've done some collaboration events with them where food writers have come to the cafe and done a Q&A about their book launch. So we've had some really interesting people, because it means that we not only meet them but learn about different styles of cooking. So for example, we had Angela Clutton, who did a book called Seasoning, which is all about cooking for the seasons and using very seasonal produce. We've got Romy Gill, who's an Indian food writer. She's coming to do a demo and everything, which is so completely different styles of cooking. But so I suppose lots of different inspiration, but then Stanley Tucci is always going to be the main man.
I thought you were going to say you model yourself on Nigella Lawson.
No.
Have you a mackerel
in the mackerel
and wherever possible, I try not to cover things in helmets of cling, because I try to keep away from the plastic wrap wherever possible. But it's.
She is an icon. But no, I can see
Stanley Tucci's the icon. It's only because I recently read his book. because he's got a new one out, but I haven't read that one yet. But his sort of memoir. And
See, we're saying you're a fan, but then you haven't read the new book. So.
I know. Sorry,
I'm
Stanley.
pulling your leg.
If he hears this, Stanley, if you're listening,
I'll tag him.
I'll read it.
I'm buying you some fake round glasses for Christmas so that you can emulate him.
I think is one, the link to Italy, because he's fascinated by Italian food, but also doesn't claim to be a complete expert. So he just enjoys eating, which I think is great.
I think we all enjoy eating, don't we, if we're honest?
Learning about it.
It's not true. I've come across people recently who see food as fuel, and I don't like them. I just think, how much joy are you missing out on if you can't find joy in food?
It's difficult. I shouldn't, but you might find those people are particularly miserable on the inside.
Maybe. But Stanley, I don't think is miserable because the way that if you look at his Instagram and have watched any of his videos,
he's not somebody I follow actually. I'll have to give him a follow.
When he's cooking, he just does it in this way of just kind of throwing things together and letting things simmer. And
I think once you know flavour, you're able to do that to a certain degree, can't you?
Yeah, and I think learning about flavour and understanding about. We actually did we had a wine tasting here the other night, and learning about your palate and tasting and actually taking the time to really taste something. Yeah. I think we often eat things in a
too
rush,
quickly, yes, because we're doing it at the same time as other things,
or distracted by the table over there where they're having a really weird conversation or whatever, and you're not actually thinking about the food that you're eating, and often that does just come down to like really good ingredients and somebody who's cooked it for you who cares about it and wants you to have a good experience, and you can taste that in the food. And I think there's a lot of chefs and food writers out there who completely know that, and trying to go back to seasonal.
It's interesting you saying about people feeling like they always know what they like and not understanding why they like it, so not understanding their palate or what it is about the food that they like. So that was what's interesting with the wine tasting, understanding, well, maybe
I'd love to do something like that because I don't understand wine at all.
Well, it's fascinating because it's saying, well, maybe you don't like that wine, you like acidic wines, so actually you'd probably like this wine as well. Yeah. And I think the same goes for food, and it goes for vegetables. We were talking earlier about vegetable growing and heritage varieties of vegetables, things that you can't buy in the supermarket, that you won't get, as we were saying about flowers being shipped and cold stored. It's the same for vegetables that are shipped halfway around the world.
Yes, yeah.
They don't taste the same.
Well, you often moan about, for instance, the pears a couple of months ago were dreadful. But you think, well, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to work out that it's been in cold storage for a long time. Pears were massively out of season until 2 or 3 weeks ago. Exactly. So if nothing has any flavour or any taste, and we're all used to being able to grow strawberry or buy strawberries and blueberries all year round because that's what we have for breakfast, because that's what we put on our muesli or whatever it is. But they don't taste the same as a Hampshire grown strawberry, because that's where the best ones come from.
Of course, I would say Dorset strawberries are quite lovely as well. But even this idea that until you really taste things, and you taste things that have been grown with love and cooked with love, you actually can't say whether you like them or not.
No.
Tomatoes. If the only tomato I'd ever had was from a Subway, I would say I hate tomatoes.
What on earth are you doing in a Subway?
Well, I'm not in a Subway.
Don't do that. Don't do that to yourself.
Example. Or, from a cold salad buffet. That's the only place
I hate cold food. It can't be just me that absolutely detests cold food. And don't get me wrong, I hate cold food as in I hate hot food that it's actually arrives cold. And I also hate cold food that's supposed to be cold, which is actually fridge cold, because it just ruins everything.
A tomato should never come out of the fridge.
No.
Anyone don't do it.
I've actually been known to microwave a salad, only for about 5 or 10 seconds to take the edge off of it, but I just cannot abide stone cold food. I just can't do it.
Anyone listening to this podcast, if you take one thing away from this, don't eat a tomato out the fridge.
And it's funny, you should touch on the fact about flavour and the wine tasting, that one of the largest things that people say to me is, how on earth do you come up with the wording and the descriptions for the roses that I smell? How do the fragrances come to you? And I think I was lucky enough that some very dear friends of us, he got into perfumery as a hobby. He was mixing his own perfumes at home, which is an incredibly interesting palette, and a lot of the things that go into them are really quite are nasty. They're really quite horrible things like whale sick and all sorts of stuff. But yeah, he did a scent test on me, and I then was able to work out the upper, middle, and lower notes of things. So when I describe things with being a citrusy higher notes, and then the back end is, for instance, bergamot or sandalwood. Yeah, I was able to really tap into that, and I've luckily enough I've got a fairly decent sized vocabulary. Which you don't find. There's a, I'm not going to name anybody because Mark will be furious if I did, but there's somebody who emulates me on YouTube who simply doesn't have the vocabulary for it. And the wording used, you think, it's a bit, what's that word for?
We don't understand.
Yeah, what are you trying to say? But yeah, it's really interesting to know that they say that the sensory things of these are often very much connected.
And actually taking the time that if you do smell a rose, actually think, what am I smelling? Because I think sometimes you just...
And where does it take
like,
me?
Oh,
I think that's the interesting thing for me.
You don't think about it.
We're recently going on a bit of a coffee journey, which we haven't really touched on, which is a big part of our business, is coffee. And I won't bore you with it too much, but obviously coffee, very much like wine or like any kind of flavour or scent profile, has a huge variety that if you're used to drinking your Nescafe Gold every morning, you have no appreciation for. And I actually don't think I had much appreciation for. And then recently we've gone on coffee tastings and listened to people who are really passionate about the subject talk about it and tried coffee from different parts of the world and that have been processed in different ways. And you suddenly realise how kind of wonderfully diverse the world is for flavours. You might hate coffee, but I can get you a coffee that tastes like blueberry muffins. And you wouldn't believe me until you drink it. Or a coffee that genuinely tastes like dark chocolate.
Yeah.
But if you go around in life thinking, I don't like coffee...
See, I could do that with rum.
You'll never know it.
Quite good when it comes to rum, but not coffee.
My partner's obsessed with banana rum at the moment.
We tried it at the weekend.
Did you?
For the first time. I finally managed to get Mark to watch the Back to Black movie.
Yes.
He was and still remains a massive, same as me, but he was very heartbroken when Amy passed away. And he is a massive, massive Amy Winehouse fan. And he didn't want to watch the film because he thought it might leave him either quite upset or he didn't do her justice or the talent wasn't represented properly. But yeah, apparently she walked into a bar and ordered this drink, which I then had to rewind several times and say, sorry, what was the ingredients of that? And we made it at the weekend for some guests. I'm not advising anybody makes this because it is absolutely foul, quite foul. But it involves a banana liqueur, Southern Comfort, part of each. So 1 part banana liqueur, 1 part Southern Comfort, 3 parts vodka, and 1 part Baileys.
Oh, no.
I mean, it just got, that's 6 shots in 1 glass over ice. We drank them.
I don't think I'd get up from that.
No. I mean, I slept very well. But no.
As a previous bartender, that fills me with such horror.
No. I'm not entirely sure what you'd mix it with to make it any less palatable, more palatable, but it's absolutely dreadful.
You know what? That's the second worst drink. No, first.
It's like one of those things you mix as a child, like mixing orange juice and milk.
Yes.
Okay.
We recently did an event where people were drinking limoncello and lemonade, and I thought that was bad enough.
No, I've done that. I've done that. But you know I like things sweet and fizzy. So what's next for both of you? I know this is a really difficult question to answer, and obviously you've created a very successful dynamic, and I think that's probably the largest stumbling block that 2 people in your position would get over. So you've created a lovely, buoyant and diverse business that's got 2 facets. What's next? Where do you see yourselves going?
I think, we're saying about contentedness and having a peaceful life. We're maybe thinking about adding a third.
A third string, yeah.
A third string to our...
Are you prepared to divulge what the third string might be? It's not a problem if you're not, because it might be private.
Because it's... Mum has had a glamping business on the farm for the last 5 years.
It's longer than that.
7
I've had the pleasure of
years.
staying here several times.
So Black Pig retreats, and they have safari tents, and it's kind of like luxury camping. But
they are luxury. I've never
really
experienced
nice.
linens like it.
Oh yeah, someone recently described it, which as a bit of a nerd, I really enjoyed this description, was the Quidditch World Cup in Harry Potter.
Very much so, yes, I'd run with that, yeah.
Small tents on the outside, incredible on the inside.
Yes, yeah.
But Mum is getting to the point where she's sort of had enough, I think. She loves the business, but she wants to have, step back and be able to enjoy her garden, for example. and the grandkids and all sorts. And actually,
again, I suppose the glamping business is the seasonal time when I'm assuming she wants to enjoy her garden or sit on the terrace and have a leisurely dream. Exactly. But you're busy, so the sun is shining and people are here and enjoying their spaces. And
and it's a lot of upkeep. And I think so. We're basically are in that position where she's asked us if we'd like to take on that side of the business. Which would be in 2026.
So she's going to do a couple more seasons,
yeah. So I think
to show you how it was properly done.
Yep.
We've got lots of ideas for it, but I think what we'd like to go down, because we've been doing some events in the cafe, and we find that the space that we have in the cafe is so great, but it means if we ever have an event, we have to close the cafe to the general public to then host that event, such as a wedding or whatever. And if we would quite like to be able to offer something else that is alongside the cafe, such as a field that you could put a beautiful marquee in, and then you have the accommodation if you want a big party or wedding or celebration or whatever. So that's probably the next step for Sorelle, is just moving into more the event side. But we really want the cafe to remain a lovely, welcoming hub that people come to and enjoy, and we don't want to kind of take our eye off the ball with that. So it's, with our workload, it's just trying to make sure that we really carefully
make the transition
and transition without going too quickly. We want to kind of expand organically, but also
I suppose it will be also having had a parent that I worked alongside, that you have to wait until they're ready to. I'm not saying, I don't think my dad will ever fully retire, because he's still doing paperwork and things for the business, but it had to be on his terms and when he was ready, and when he was mentally ready or physically ready. Because
it's a big thing. Like, it's mum's.
You don't want to shove them too quickly.
She started it, and she's so obviously knows the business inside out. And I think we also want to make sure that we do the transition really well, and she'll always be there to help us and advise us. And make sure that she's happy with the ideas that we've got for it.
The magpies are joining in.
Is that not a chicken?
No.
I think it's a magpie.
Magpie.
And doing it justice, because she's done such a fantastic job with the glamping site. And it's been so popular. Well,
I say, I think my family have been 4 times, I've personally been twice, and 3 times been, and enjoyed every single stay. There's something magical about this particular location and what you've created, and the view here, the sky here, the quality of the tents and the linens all brought together. I'm only literally 50 minutes away by car, but you feel like you could be anywhere in the world. And I've said to you, I think last time we came in the October, but even you closed the season down last year, Mark and I had the pleasure of staying in your yurt, which is the first time we'd been in that particular accommodation. That actually, by the time you arrive here, you've unpacked the car, the weight that's lifted off of you just 20 minutes later are just decompressed and nice.
That's so nice.
And especially seeing as I think one of the times you came and stayed was almost hurricane type weather.
Oh no. We had a really good time.
Nearly blown away.
I do remember your father turning up halfway through one evening and offering to re-batten us down. He was a bit concerned we were going to blow away. But again, that's one of those things you can't do. You can't. Do you need any more timber? Do you need any more wood? No, we're all right.
But certainly, like, the future for our flower farm, we were hoping to try and do it this year, but with the growing season we had anyway, and also the amount of labour that it requires to get it up to scratch, we really want to open the flower field to be able to do pick your own.
Yes,
Even if it's for very specific times. We like the idea of doing cocktails and cut flowers, so you can
very nice
have a
idea.
Floral cocktail and cut some flowers.
I think I'm very much down there. Can we throw in a charcuterie board while we're there as well?
Absolutely.
Although you may have to, you can't. I don't think you could do a bottomless brunch like that. I mean, I think you'd very much have to cap it at two or three glasses of something, and then that would probably be
have to confiscate the secateurs at some point. I think.
Be a lot of lost digits and
yes, and probably dahlias cut down to nothing.
You said long stems. It didn't mean whole plants.
And you're out there with your trowel. But that's certainly something that we would really like to do, because at the moment our cafe is right next door to our flower farm. They're so close. But they're not accessible yet. And we would love to be able to open up the flower field, let people have a wander around, maybe cut a few stems, and have that as part of their experience of visiting here. Because even though they're so close, we still get asked all the time,
where is it? Where is it? Yeah.
Where is it? Can I go and have a look around? And at the moment it's like, oh yeah, we have to traipse through the mud and the brambles, and it's a bit of a...
It's all authentic.
Yeah, and our insurance company would probably
okay,
not
good.
be
Yes.
But that's certainly our aim, and we'd love to be able to incorporate that more, so it feels more like one connected business rather than two entities
run by two different people. That sounds lovely. It sounds really exciting.
Oh. Yeah, it is exciting. It is a bit terrifying as well, because
change always is.
Change, and also just, you know, we're quite tired. I think that's the thing.
Get used to that. Unfortunately, no, I shouldn't say get used to that. That shouldn't be the norm. But I think we're brought up with this expectation that you're only successful if you're utterly exhausted and burnt out.
Is rubbish,
it's a millennial curse, though, isn't it?
Poppycock.
Yeah, I think boomers don't feel it, and I don't think the younger generations feel it. I think it's our millennial curse.
No, the burnout is real, especially I say when it comes to social media. Taking the time to step back and go, right, okay, no, I'm actually not working smart. I'm thrashing about and I'm tiring myself out. It's difficult to actually stand away from it. So
I needed that voice at 11:30 last night when I was doing accounts.
But this is why it's nice having chats like a chat with you today, because then you get a little bit more excited about it again, and we think actually, we can do this, and we are on a track, and it's going to be fine. It will be fine.
It will be fine.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. I'm so sorry that we've chunted on for such a long time. Hopefully you've enjoyed our chat. It's been great to catch up. Wonderful. Right, I'll see you all again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, no problem. Take care. I hope that you enjoyed listening to the chat that I had with Natalie and Matilda over at Sorelle as much as I did having it. It's lovely to see two siblings getting along so well and working in perfect harmony towards their combined goals. Both focused on the same thing, but also not afraid of following their own aspirations, dreams and goals at the same time. Please do head across to Instagram and follow them. And if you're heading through North Dorset at any point in time, please do make sure that you pop in and grab yourself a very lovely coffee and maybe a spot of brunch. Also, if you're local, look out for one of their really lovely guest chef events, which they put on during the summer months, inviting local chefs to come into their kitchen and cook for large groups of people who all dine at the same time. It's a really lovely way of sharing the social aspect of food, getting to know new people, or dining with those that you love and care for. On next week's episode, we're going to be talking everything sweet peas, and whether you make an autumn sowing or whether you hold off to sowing in late February and early March, I'm going to be talking you through the full process. I'm also going to have a special guest on with me next week, and we're going to be talking to Michael Randall, who owns and operates Misfits Plants. I had the pleasure of meeting Michael during the summer months when he came with his stall of weird, wonderful and unusual houseplants to my open garden event in June. I hope you enjoy our conversation, and I look forward to speaking to you again next week. Happy gardening.